So there's really only 3 permits you need to worry about. That's Glacier, Yellowstone, and Rocky Mountain National Park. I'll start in southbound order since that's how I did it. So when you get to East Glacier by car or train or whatever, the nearest ranger station where you can get a permit is Two Medicine Ranger Station. That's about a 10 or 15 minute drive. There is a shuttle that can take you there from the Glacier National Park Lodge. The shuttle doesn't run that often, if I remember correctly. You just have to check with the people at the front desk. I think I had to wait like an hour and a half or so. Now, you're not going to have any kind of cell reception or Wi-Fi when you get to Two Medicine, so if you need to do something on your phone or whatever, make sure you do it when you're in East Glacier. Now, about 110-15 miles of the CDT goes through Glacier National Park, so that's a pretty big chunk. When you hike through Glacier, you have to stay at the designated campsites. You can't just camp wherever you want. That's where the permit comes into play. You have to plan your days pretty much where you're going to camp. They have designated camp spots pretty much spread out, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 miles along the trail. Now, if you're going Sobo, it's going to be hard to make an itinerary because when you start in June or July, that's pretty much prime time season for Glacier, which means a lot of campsites, or pretty much all of them, are going to be booked. This was my problem when I started. I legitimately took over 3 hours at the ranger station to make my itinerary. I'm going to put a map of Glacier National Park and its campsites in the description to this video, so make sure you look at that. If you're going to go Sobo or Nobo, I highly recommend looking at this map beforehand and try and make at least 3 different itineraries of where you want to camp. If you're going Sobo, you might actually have to wait 1 or 2 days for more campsites to open up. Again, it's just going to be really, really packed. You can get a permit online, but if you do that, they do limit you to 16 miles per day. Now, one of the reasons why it took me so long to make my itinerary was because there's one campsite on the CDT through Glacier that is pretty much always going to be booked. And this campsite is called Reynolds Campsite. The reason it's always booked is because the campsite before it and the campsite after it, I think it's like over 10 miles away. So that means that everybody who goes through there pretty much has to stay at that one campsite. However, there is a campsite that's 5 miles off trail that's pretty close to Reynolds. I think it's called Gunsight Campsite. So that's another option you could take if you really want to get started. Now, if you're going northbound, you can call ahead to try and make your permit or make your reservation. But by the time you get there late in the season, Glacier really isn't going to be that crowded. So it's not going to be that hard to make an itinerary. So you should be able to just walk in and get one. As far as how much the permit costs, I think mine was only like $50, so it's not that expensive. Alright, so the next permit is going to be Yellowstone. About 70 miles of the CDT goes through Yellowstone, so it's not as much as Glacier, but it's still a decent amount. The trail through there is really easy. Yellowstone is where I recommend calling ahead to reserve a permit. Yogi's guidebook was really helpful for this. She has a page that just lists out all the campsites and the miles in between each campsites. Now, you're not allowed to camp in Yellowstone without a permit. So here's what I recommend doing if you're going southbound. Camp right on the border of Yellowstone the night before. Alright, so I am here at the Yellowstone boundary. Can't cross that, at least not today. Got here about exactly 8:30. So still made pretty good time even though I got off the trail a little bit. You have about 20 miles of Yellowstone to hike before you get to the ranger station at Old Faithful. Wake up early, hike the 20 miles in the Yellowstone. It's gonna be really easy. After those 20 miles, you'll be at Old Faithful. You can pick up your permit at the ranger station. You can also ditch your pack at ranger station and they'll watch it for you. Now, I recommend staying as long as you can at Old Faithful because there's a lot of stuff to do there. There's a lot of things to eat. There's a lot of things to see. The Old Faithful geyser goes off about once every 90 minutes. So if you've never seen that, probably not going to want to miss it.
Look at the ones over there.
There's also going to be a lot of people there because it's a really big tourist attraction. Now after that, there's a ton of campsites within 10 miles southbound of Old Faithful. So I ended up camping like 5 or 7 miles out of Old Faithful. So that means that day I just did 20 in, stayed at Old Faithful for a while, and then 7 out. Now the next day, hike 20 miles southbound and you'll get to the road where you can hitch into Grant Village. The hitch is only about 6 miles and it's supposed to be a pretty easy hitch, even though it wasn't for me. When you're in Grant Village, you don't need a permit to stay there. They have a campsite that you could stay at. I think it was only like $5 or $10. They also have shower and laundry and a bunch of stores and restaurants you could eat there. So stay there for the night, do all the chores you want to do. For me, that was my last shower and laundry for a while until Rollins, I think, or Lander, which is a pretty good distance away. The next day, hitch back out to the trail, and from there you got the 27 miles before you're out of Yellowstone and you don't need a permit anymore. Alright, I have now exited Yellowstone National Park. Boom. So
Looks like that was about 70 miles.
If you're going northbound, you can just do the opposite. Hike the 27 into Yellowstone, hitch into Grant Village, get your permit there, spend the night. The following day, you can hike about 20 or so miles, camp right on the edge of Old Faithful Village. The next day, spend as much time as you can at Old Faithful. Then it should be an easy 20 miles out of Yellowstone. Alright, the last permit you need to worry about is the Rocky Mountain National Park Loop. And you honestly don't really need a permit for this because the whole section is only about 23-25 miles. If you want to do it, just camp on the edge of the park, and then the next day you wake up, hike the 20-something miles of the loop, and then you're done. That way, 1, you don't need a permit. 2, you don't need the bear can that's also required to camp in the park. So that's pretty much what every single thru hiker does. Alright, I hope that answers your questions about permits for the CDT. It's not as difficult as people make it out to be. There's no one all-encompassing permit like the PCT, so it is a little bit more challenging, but not really. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments.